A beggar girl, 4, with a baby in her arms, approaches a millionaire and says, "Please leave the scraps for him to eat." But the shocked millionaire does something no one expected. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The scorching July sun beat down on the cobblestone streets of Asheville, North Carolina, as Richard Sterling, 52, exited the Copper Spoon, a local bistro, after a solitary lunch, a routine ever since he lost his wife, Sarah, 5 years prior. The owner of Sterling Textiles, the region's largest textile mill, adjusted his navy blazer and walked towards his black Cadillac Escalade, parked in the meager shade of a maple tree that offered little relief from the North Carolina heat. That's when he saw her, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6, as thin as a wounded sparrow, cradled a baby in her arms, no older than 8 months. Her bare feet trod the hot pavement, and she approached him with a determination that belied her apparent fragility. "Mister, do you have any leftover food? It's for my little brother," said Lily in a voice that tried to be strong but trembled slightly. Her brown eyes were too large for her small face, and carried a burden no child should bear. Richard stopped in his tracks. There was something about the scene that squeezed his chest in a way he hadn't felt in years. Perhaps it was the tenderness with which the girl held the baby, or perhaps it was the way little Ethan looked at her with complete trust, even in the midst of their desperate situation. "Are you alone?" Richard asked, crouching down to be at the girl's height. The movement dirtied his dress pants with dust, but he didn't care. "Mommy's working," Lily replied quickly, as if she had rehearsed the answer. "She told me to take care of Ethan and find something for him to eat." The baby in her arms was visibly malnourished. His cheeks were sunken, his arms as thin as twigs, and he had stopped crying too long ago. A silence that Richard recognized as more dangerous than any scream. It was the resignation of extreme hunger. "Where do you live?" Richard insisted, feeling a growing urgency in his chest. Lily hesitated, biting her lower lip. "At Aunt Carol's, up in West Asheville. But today she said she couldn't give us any food because she already gave us some yesterday." West Asheville was known as one of the poorer neighborhoods in Asheville, where modest bungalows clung to the hillsides, vying for space with the undergrowth and mud that flowed down during the rainy seasons. Richard knew that reality well. His factory employed many people from that area. "And your mother? When does she get back?" "At night, after dark. She cleans houses for people all day." At that moment, baby Ethan let out a weak whimper, and Richard saw something that made his world stop for a few seconds. When the boy opened his eyes and looked directly at him, there was a disturbing familiarity in that gaze, something that stirred deep, painful memories he had tried to bury. Without thinking twice, Richard got up and opened the back door of the Escalade. "Get in the car," he said, his voice firmer than he intended. Lily took a few steps back, clutching her brother to her chest. "Mommy said, never get in a stranger's car." "Your mother is right," Richard agreed, realizing how his proposal sounded. "But your brother needs food now, and I can help. Let's go get your mother first, okay?" The girl looked at the baby in her arms, then at the well-dressed man in front of her, weighing options that no child should have to consider. Her brother's hunger won out over caution. "Okay," she murmured, walking cautiously towards the car. As he drove through the narrow streets leading to West Asheville, Richard wondered what he was doing. In 5 years of widowhood, he had become a methodical man, controlling every aspect of his life to avoid painful surprises. His mornings always started at 6, with black coffee and reading factory reports. His afternoons were dedicated to visits to the production departments, where he knew every employee by name. His nights always ended with a glass of bourbon while looking at Sarah's photo on his nightstand. He never did anything impulsive. He never changed his routine. He never got involved in situations that could bring emotional complications, but there was something about these children that had broken all his protective barriers. "Aunt Carol's house is over there," Lily indicated, pointing to a small frame house with peeling paint and a screen door that had seen better days. Richard parked the car and observed the neighborhood. Women were doing laundry in makeshift tubs in the yards. Children were playing with makeshift baseballs in the dirt street, and the smell of home cooking mingled with the aroma of honeysuckle growing wild among the houses. "Michelle hasn't gotten back yet," said a stout woman who came out of the house when she saw the car. Carol, looking to be around 60, eyed Richard suspiciously. "Who are you?" "My name is Richard Sterling. I found the children downtown asking for food and brought them home." Carol frowned, clearly bothered by the situation. "Michelle should be ashamed of herself for letting these kids go hungry. I do what I can, but I'm not their mother." "Their mother is working," Richard defended, surprising himself with his own response. Working. That girl always has an excuse," Carol grumbled. "Ever since Danny disappeared, she's been a bit lost. But what can you do, right? Life doesn't wait for anyone." The name Danny echoed in Richard's mind like an unanswered question. Who was this man who had disappeared from the children's lives? At that moment, Ethan began to cry, a weak but persistent cry that cut through the warm afternoon air. Lily tried to calm him, rocking him gently, but it was obvious that the baby was hungry. "He needs to eat," Richard said to Carol. "Do you have anything?" "I have some leftover oatmeal from yesterday, but I don't know if it's still good." "I'll buy them some food," Richard offered immediately. Carol studied him with suspicious eyes. "And why would you do that? You don't even know these children." It was a fair question, and Richard realized he didn't have a simple answer. Why was he there? Why had these children moved him in a way that no other situation had in the past 5 years? "Because they need it," was all he could say. While they waited for Michelle to arrive, Richard bought milk, fruit and crackers at a nearby corner store. He watched Lily feed her brother with a patience and care that deeply moved him. The girl had maternal gestures that were both touching and disturbing. No 6-year-old should have so much responsibility. The sun was beginning to set when they finally saw a female figure climbing the steep hill that led to Carol's house. Michelle Beggar, 23, walked slowly, clearly exhausted after a full day of work. Her simple clothes were stained with cleaning products, and she carried a bag with the materials she used in the houses where she worked. When she saw the Cadillac parked in front of the house and an unknown man with her children, Michelle quickened her pace, her heart pounding with fear and worry. "Lily! Ethan!" Michelle dropped her bag of cleaning supplies on the ground and ran towards her children, her face overcome with panic. When she saw that they were both safe, fed, and clean, her expression turned to confusion. "What's going on here?" Richard stood up respectfully, extending his hand in greeting. "Miss Baker, my name is Richard Sterling. I found your children downtown and—" "My children were begging?" Michelle's voice came out choked, filled with a humiliation that made Richard regret mentioning the encounter that way. "They were hungry," he said softly. "Lily was taking very good care of her little brother, but I'm an irresponsible mother, is that it?" Michelle took Ethan from Lily's arms, checking to see if the baby was okay. Her hands trembled slightly, and Richard realized that they were the hands of someone who worked too hard for too little. Carol, who was watching everything from the porch, decided to interfere. "Michelle, girl, this man here bought food for the children and brought them home. At least thank him properly." "I appreciate the kindness," Michelle said, raising her chin with a dignity that impressed Richard. "But I can take care of my children myself." "Of course you can," Richard agreed. "That's not what I meant. It's just that, well, maybe I can help in some way." Michelle studied him with suspicious eyes. She knew rich men who offered help expecting something in return, and she had learned the hard way that apparent kindnesses sometimes came with prices she couldn't afford. "Help how?" "I need someone to take care of the cleaning at my house," Richard lied, improvising. In fact, he had had Dorothy Johnson taking care of everything in his mansion for over 10 years, but something was driving him to create a solution. "It's a big house, and it would be a stable job." Michelle hesitated. Stable work was something she hadn't known for months. Since Danny had disappeared, she had lived on odd jobs that she got through referrals, never knowing if she would have work the following week. "How much would you pay?" "Enough so that your children no longer have to go hungry," Richard replied, avoiding mentioning specific amounts. "And there's a caretaker's cottage in the back of the property. You could live there." The offer was too tempting to be true, and that scared Michelle. Why would you do this for strangers? It was the second time that day someone had asked Richard that question, and he still didn't have a satisfactory answer. There was something about this family that moved him in a way he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way Lily protected her brother, painfully reminding him of how Sarah had cared for him when he was sick. Maybe it was Michelle's determined gaze, who fought alone against the world to protect her children. "Because everyone needs help sometimes," was all he could say. Carol shook her head impatiently. "Michelle, girl, are you going to stand there questioning the man's goodness? Just accept this blessing that God sent." "It's not that simple, Aunt Carol," Michelle replied. "Nothing in life is free." At that moment, Ethan began to stir restlessly in his mother's arms, and she realized that he was more alert than he had been in weeks. His cheeks had a little more color, and he looked around with curiosity instead of the apathy of chronic hunger. "What did you give him to eat?" she asked, softening her tone slightly. "Milk with oatmeal," Lily replied before Richard could speak. "And crackers too, Mommy. He ate a lot." Michelle looked at her daughter and saw something she hadn't seen in a long time, a genuine smile. Lily was relaxed, without the constant tension she carried on her shoulders when she worried about her brother's hunger. "Can I think about the proposal?" she asked finally. "Of course," Richard agreed. "But, well, if it's not too much to ask, I'd like you to have dinner with me tonight, so we can talk more about the details." Michelle looked at her work-stained clothes, then at the children. "We're not dressed appropriately to go out." "Who said anything about going out? I'll cook," Richard said, surprising himself. It had been years since he had cooked for anyone other than himself, and even then rarely. "At my house. It's close by." It was a lie. Richard's mansion was in Biltmore Forest, the most exclusive neighborhood in Asheville, at least 20 minutes away from West Asheville by car. But he wanted to show Michelle that the proposal was serious, that the house where they would live was real. "I don't know," Michelle hesitated. "For the love of Pete, girl," Carol exclaimed. "The man is offering work, a house, and even wants to cook dinner. What more do you want? For him to marry you too?" The comment made Michelle blush, and Richard hastened to clarify. "It's just a job proposal, Miss Baker, nothing more than that." Lily, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, tugged on her mother's skirt. "Mommy, can I play at his house?" The daughter's innocent question decided everything. Michelle realized that it had been months since she had seen Lily ask to play. The girl had become a small adult too early, carrying responsibilities that destroyed her childhood day after day. "Okay," she agreed, "but just to talk about the job." The drive to the mansion was made in tense silence. Michelle held Ethan in her lap, while watching the streets gradually change through the Escalade window. The simple houses of West Asheville gave way to the middle-class buildings of downtown, which in turn were replaced by the huge mansions of Biltmore Forest. When they arrived at Richard's property, Michelle felt a knot in her stomach. The house was imposing, with manicured gardens, high walls, and an electronic gate that opened automatically. It was a completely different world from hers, and she wondered if she was making a mistake. "Oh my gosh," murmured Lily, her eyes wide as she saw the illuminated pool and the garden with a fountain. "It's like the houses on TV." Richard smiled at the girl's reaction. "Want to see it?" Before Michelle could answer, the front door of the house opened, and a black woman, stout, about 45 years old, appeared on the porch. Dorothy Johnson wore a simple dress and an apron, and her expression clearly showed that she was not expecting visitors. "Mr. Sterling? You didn't tell me you were bringing people for dinner," she said, trying to maintain a respectful tone but failing to hide her irritation. "Dorothy, these are Michelle, Lily, and Ethan," Richard introduced. "They're having dinner with us today." Dorothy carefully observed the family. Her trained housekeeper's eyes immediately noticed the signs. Clean but well-worn clothes, the children's paleness indicating poor nutrition, and above all, Michelle's defensive posture of someone used to not being welcome in places like this. "Good evening," said Dorothy, descending the steps of the porch. When she got closer to Michelle, something strange happened. She stopped in her tracks, studying the young woman's face with a puzzled expression. "Michelle Baker?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes," replied Michelle, equally confused. "Do you know me?" Dorothy was silent for a few seconds, as if trying to fit pieces of a puzzle in her mind. "Aren't you Francis Baker's daughter, from Rose Lane?" "Yes, I am," confirmed Michelle, surprised. "Did you know my mother?" "Knew her well," said Dorothy, her expression softening completely. "We were neighbors when you were little. I lived in the blue house next to the drugstore." The revelation created a completely different atmosphere. Michelle vaguely remembered an older girl who always greeted her when she went to the drugstore with her mother, but she hadn't made the connection. "Ms. Johnson, now I remember you," said Michelle, a genuine smile appearing on her face for the first time since she arrived. Richard watched the interaction with growing interest. It seemed like coincidences were aligning in an almost impossible way. First, finding the children just as he was leaving his favorite bistro. Now, discovering that Dorothy knew Michelle from childhood. "Small world," he commented. "Too small," Dorothy agreed, but there was something in her tone that suggested she didn't consider it a simple coincidence. "Come on in, girl. Let's talk properly." The interior of the mansion made Michelle even more uncomfortable. The high ceilings, the fine wood furniture, and the paintings on the walls created an atmosphere of wealth that she had only seen when cleaning similar houses. The difference was that this time she wasn't there as an employee, but as a guest, a position she didn't quite know how to occupy. Lily, on the other hand, watched everything with childlike fascination. Her little fingers delicately touched the polished surfaces as if afraid of breaking something valuable just by looking at it. "Sit here, honey," said Dorothy, indicating the living room couch. "And you too, Mr. Sterling. I'll make some coffee so we can talk properly." "Dorothy, I said I'd cook dinner," Richard reminded her. "With all due respect, boss, but you can't even fry an egg properly," replied Dorothy, with the frankness of someone who had worked in the house for a decade. "Let me take care of it." Michelle sat on the edge of the couch, holding Ethan with extra care, as if the baby might stain something. "You don't have to bother, Ms. Johnson. We already ate." "Nonsense, girl. You're as thin as a rail," observed Dorothy, using the same maternal tone she probably used when Michelle was a child. "And these children need real food, not that junk you must be eating out there." As Dorothy walked away to the kitchen, an awkward silence settled in the room. Richard sat in the armchair opposite the couch, studying Michelle discreetly. There was something familiar about her that he couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was the way she held the baby, or perhaps it was the determination that shone through her tired eyes. "May I ask about the children's father?" Richard said carefully. "Carol mentioned that he disappeared." Michelle's face closed up immediately. "Danny left 3 months ago and hasn't come back. Didn't leave a note, didn't say anything. One day he was here, the next he was gone." "Did you argue?" "No," she replied, her voice getting lower. "Actually, everything was fine between us. Ethan was only a few months old. Danny was working in construction, earning good money. Suddenly, he just vanished." Lily, who was playing quietly with a rag doll she had brought with her, looked up. "Daddy said he'd be back soon, but he didn't come back." "He said that to you?" asked Richard, addressing the girl. "Yes. He gave me a kiss and said he was going to take care of something important and would be back for dinner." "But he didn't come back." Michelle pulled her daughter closer. "Lily, you don't have to keep talking about it. "But I miss Daddy," said the girl with a simplicity that broke Richard's heart. "He always took me to see the horses at the fair." Richard realized there was something strange about this story. A man doesn't abandon his family out of the blue, especially when things are going well. There was something Michelle wasn't saying, perhaps because she didn't know, perhaps because she preferred not to know. "Did you try to look for him?" "Of course I tried," replied Michelle, with a bitterness she couldn't hide. "I went to the construction site where he worked. The foreman said that Danny had quit suddenly, without explanation. I went to his mother's house in Charlotte. She said she didn't know anything. I even went to the police, but they said an adult man has the right to leave if he wants to." "And you think that's what it was? That he simply decided to leave?" Michelle was silent for a long moment, rocking Ethan gently. "I don't know what to think. Sometimes I think something bad might have happened to him. Other times I think he got tired of being a father so early and decided to start a new life far away from here." At that moment, Dorothy returned from the kitchen carrying a tray with coffee and homemade cookies. "All right, now let's talk properly. Michelle, honey, tell me how you stopped studying nursing." The question caught everyone off guard. Michelle looked up, clearly bothered. "How do you know I studied nursing? Your mother always spoke with pride that you were going to be a nurse," explained Dorothy, pouring the coffee. "Said you were the smartest in the family, that you were going to have a different life." "Yeah," murmured Michelle, accepting the cup with both hands. "Things changed." "Did you graduate?" asked Richard, genuinely interested. "I graduated and worked for 2 years at St. Joseph's Hospital," she replied, taking a sip of coffee. Until what?" insisted Dorothy. Michelle hesitated, as if deciding how much of the truth she could reveal. "Until I had some problems there and had to leave." "What kind of problems?" pressed Richard. "Problems I'd rather not discuss," she said firmly. "The important thing is that now I clean houses to survive and take care of my children." Richard realized he had touched on a sensitive subject, but his curiosity was piqued. A trained nurse doesn't abandon her profession to become a cleaner without a very serious reason, and the way Michelle avoided talking about it, that reason probably wasn't good. "Is St. Joseph's Hospital here in Asheville?" he asked. "It is," confirmed Dorothy. "It's a private hospital, one of the most expensive in the region. Only rich people are treated there." Richard knew St. Joseph's well. Sarah had been treated there during the last months of her life. It was a reputable hospital, with renowned doctors and modern equipment. If Michelle had worked there, it meant she was a competent professional. "May I ask why you left?" he tried again. "I already said I'd rather not talk about it," repeated Michelle, but this time with a firmness that made it clear the subject was closed. Lily, who had finished eating the cookies, got up and walked to the bookcase that occupied an entire wall of the room. "Wow, so many books," she said, impressed. "Do you like to read?" asked Richard. "I like it a lot. At school I always got good grades in English, but now I'm not going anymore." "Why?" Michelle answered for her daughter. "Because we don't have money for school supplies, uniforms, things like that. And also because I need her to take care of Ethan while I work." The revelation hurt Richard more than he expected. Lily was an intelligent child. That was obvious from the way she spoke and behaved. Taking her out of school was condemning her to repeat her mother's cycle of poverty. "In the job I offered," he said carefully, "there would be time for Lily to study, and I could pay for the school supplies." "You don't even know yet if you're going to hire me," Michelle reminded him. "We haven't even talked about the terms of the job." "Then let's talk," said Richard, straightening up in the armchair. "I need someone to take care of the general cleaning of the house, washing and ironing clothes, cooking some meals. Dorothy can teach you the routine." Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "I can." "You can," confirmed Richard, improvising quickly. "You always said you wanted a helper." "I never said that," replied Dorothy, confused. "I've been taking care of everything alone for 10 years. Richard realized he was getting complicated. The truth was he didn't need another maid, but there was something about this family that prevented him from simply giving them money and leaving. He needed to keep them close, find out why they moved him so much. Well, now that the house will have children, it will need more care, he invented, and Dorothy isn't so young anymore. "Hey!" protested Dorothy. "I'm 45 years old, not 80. Michelle watched the interaction between boss and employee with interest. It was obvious that Richard was inventing justifications to hire her, but she couldn't understand why. She knew enough rich men to know that they didn't do anything without a reason. "How much would you pay?" she asked directly. Richard mentioned an amount that made Michelle choke on her coffee. It was 3 times more than she could earn, with the odd jobs, enough to live with dignity and still save some money. "That's a lot," she said, suspicious. "Why would you pay so much?" "Because it's the fair price," Richard replied, "and because I want you to have a dignified life." Dorothy, who was watching everything in silence, noticed something that the others didn't. There was an urgency in Richard's behavior that she knew well. It was the same urgency he showed when trying to control situations that reminded him of Sarah. "Michelle," she said softly, "can I talk to you about something?" "Sure, Miss Johnson." "Mr. Sterling is a good man. Kind of quirky sometimes, but good. If he's offering help, it's because he really wants to help. Doesn't expect anything in return." Michelle looked at Richard, trying to read his intentions. "And if I accept, where would we live?" "In the cottage in the back," explained Richard. "It has 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a small living room. It's simple but comfortable. Can I see it?" "Of course." They walked through the illuminated garden to the cottage in the back of the property. It was really simple but clean and well-maintained. To Michelle, used to sharing a room with her 2 children in Carol's house, it seemed like a palace. "What do you think?" asked Richard. Michelle looked around, imagining Lily playing in the little room that would be all hers, Ethan crawling through the room without the danger of bothering anyone, herself having privacy for the first time in months. "I accept," she said finally, "but with one condition." "What?" "If at any time you are not satisfied with my work, you can dismiss me without problems. And if I decide that it's not working out, I can leave without creating a fuss." "Agreed," Richard agreed, extending his hand. When their hands touched to seal the agreement, Michelle felt something strange, as if that moment was more important than it seemed, as if it was changing not only the course of her life, but also the life of the man in front of her. Michelle's first days in the mansion passed like a confusing dream. Waking up without worrying about what the children would eat for breakfast was such a strange feeling that it took her a few seconds every morning to remember where she was. The refrigerator always full, the stove working perfectly, hot water coming out of the tap, basic luxuries that she had lost so long ago that she had almost forgotten what it was like to live with dignity. Lily blossomed in a way that surprised everyone. In a week, the serious and worried girl had given way to a curious child who explored every corner of the garden, asked questions about everything, and laughed with a frequency that Michelle hadn't heard in months. Best of all, she had returned to school, wearing a new uniform that Richard had bought without making a fuss. "Mommy, today the teacher said I'm one of the best students in the class," Lily told her during lunch, her eyes shining with pride. "That's great, honey," replied Michelle, serving more green beans on the girl's plate. "You've always been smart. And she said that if I keep it up, I can even skip a grade next year." Dorothy, who was having lunch with them in the main house kitchen, smiled approvingly. "This girl has a future, just like her mother when she was young." "I wasn't that smart," protested Michelle. "Yes, you were. Your mother always told me that you got the best grades in the whole school." Ethan, now almost 9 months old and visibly stronger and healthier, banged his little hands on the high chair table, trying to grab the pieces of banana that Michelle had cut for him. The baby had gained weight, his cheeks were rosy, and he smiled constantly, a transformation that moved Michelle every day. Michelle, said Dorothy suddenly, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you never properly marry Danny? You lived together for so long, had 2 children. Michelle stopped eating, her fork suspended in the air. He always said he would get around to it, but he never did. Said he wanted to have a nice party, but never saved enough money. And you didn't push? I didn't think it was important, Michelle lied. The truth was that she had pushed, especially when she found out she was pregnant with Ethan. But Danny always made up an excuse, and in the end, she had given up insisting. At that moment, Richard entered the kitchen, returning from work earlier than normal. He had developed the habit of having lunch at home in the past few days, claiming that Dorothy's cooking was better than any restaurant in town. Good afternoon, everyone, he greeted, loosening his tie. How was your day? Lily got a perfect score on her math test, reported Michelle. Really? Richard addressed the girl with a genuine smile. Congratulations, Lily. You're very smart. Thank you, Uncle Richard, replied the girl, who had spontaneously started calling him that. Michelle watched these interactions with conflicting feelings. Richard was kind to her children, respectful to her, and paid exactly what he had promised. But there was something about his behavior that she couldn't decipher. Sometimes she caught him looking at Ethan with a strange expression, as if he were remembering something painful. Other times she saw him watching her work with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Mr. Sterling, said Dorothy, aren't you going to have lunch? I am. I just need to make a call first. He left the kitchen, but Michelle managed to overhear part of the phone conversation he had in the living room. Robert, I need you to do some discreet research for me. I want to know everything about someone. Michelle Baker worked at St. Joseph's Hospital until about 2 years ago. Yes, it's important. No, she can't know I'm investigating. Michelle's blood ran cold. Richard was investigating her past behind her back. Why? What did he expect to find? Her first instinct was to gather the children and leave immediately. But where would they go? They no longer had Carol's house. They had no money. They had nothing. She returned to the kitchen, trying to appear normal. But Dorothy immediately noticed that something was wrong. What's wrong, girl? You've gone white as a sheet. Nothing, lied Michelle. Just a headache. But during the rest of the day, she couldn't concentrate on her work. Her hands trembled as she ironed the clothes, and she found herself constantly looking out the window, as if expecting to see someone arriving to arrest her. At night, after the children fell asleep, Michelle went to the main house. Richard was in the library, reading a technical book about textiles. When he saw her enter, he looked up with a smile that she found forced. Michelle, what brings you here? I need to talk to you. Of course, sit down. She remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. I overheard your phone conversation today. Richard's smile disappeared. Oh, why are you investigating my life? Richard closed the book and looked directly at her. Because I want to understand who you really are. And why does that matter? I do my job right, take good care of the children, don't steal anything. It's not that, he interrupted, standing up. It's just, there's something familiar about you. Something I can't identify. Familiar how? Richard hesitated, struggling with words he didn't know how to say. My wife was treated at St. Joseph's Hospital before she passed away. You worked there at the same time. Maybe you knew each other. The revelation hit Michelle like a punch to the gut. She remembered Sarah Sterling, the elegant and sweet woman who had been hospitalized several times during 2018. A patient who always thanked them for their care, who treated the nurses with respect, who... Sarah Sterling was your wife? She was, confirmed Richard, watching her reaction carefully. Michelle felt her legs weaken and leaned against the armchair. Oh my God, you remember her? Of course I remember, whispered Michelle. She was special. Always kind, always smiling even when she was suffering. So you knew each other. I took care of her several times, admitted Michelle, the memories returning in painful waves. She always asked about my life, about my studies. Said I was going to be an excellent nurse. Richard approached her. So you know how she... No, said Michelle quickly, recoiling. I wasn't there when it happened. I'd already left the hospital. Why did you leave? Michelle looked at him, weighing her options. She could lie, make up some story, but there was something in Richard's eyes that prevented her from continuing to deceive him. And if he was investigating, he would soon find out the truth anyway. Because I discovered something I shouldn't have, she said finally. What? That some doctors at the hospital were doing wrong things. Charging for surgeries they didn't perform, using expired medications on patients who couldn't afford private treatment, falsifying tests. Richard was silent, processing the information. And you reported it? I tried. I took evidence to the hospital administration. But, Michelle swallowed hard. But the medical director, Dr. Aurelius Vasconcelos, offered me money to keep quiet. When I refused, he fired me and made sure I was blacklisted. No hospital or clinic in the region hires me anymore. That's why you became a cleaner. That's why I became a cleaner, she confirmed bitterly. And that's why I need you to stop investigating my life. If Dr. Vasconcelos finds out where I'm working, what will he do? Michelle hesitated, then decided to tell everything. He's already done a lot. He made me lose the apartment I was renting. He made Danny lose his job at his construction company. And I'm sure that... She stopped in the middle of the sentence, a terrible realization taking over her. What? Pressed Richard. I'm sure that Danny's disappearance has to do with Dr. Vasconcelos, she whispered. Danny had been receiving threats in recent months. People were calling the house saying it was better for me to keep my mouth shut, otherwise something bad would happen to my family. Richard felt a fury growing in his chest. And you never thought of going to the police? With what proof? Dr. Vasconcelos is a very influential person in Asheville. Has political connections, a lot of money. Who will believe the word of a cleaner against his? At that moment, Richard fully understood why he had felt compelled to help Michelle and her children. It wasn't just compassion or generosity, it was justice. His wife had been a victim of the same corruption that had destroyed the life of that family. And now he had the opportunity to do something about it. The tension in the house changed completely after the conversation in the library. Michelle spent the following days in a state of constant alert, looking nervously out the window whenever she heard a car pass. Richard, in turn, plunged into an obsessive investigation about Dr. Vasconcelos, making discreet calls and talking to old acquaintances who might have information about the doctor. It was during one of those investigations that Robert Mendez, his lawyer, brought the first disturbing information. Richard, you need to know something about this Dr. Vasconcelos, said Robert during a phone conversation on a Tuesday afternoon. He's not just corrupt. There are rumors that he's involved with much worse things. What kind of things? Organ trafficking. Patients who enter his hospital in serious condition and simply disappear. Families who never receive news again, falsified death certificates. Richard felt his blood run cold. Do you have proof of this? Nothing concrete. They're just rumors, but coming from reliable sources. And there's one thing you need to know about your wife. What? Asked Richard, already fearing the answer. Sarah didn't die of natural causes, Richard. There are inconsistencies in her medical report. Medications that don't match, procedures that weren't performed as described. The phone almost slipped out of Richard's hands. Are you saying that? I'm saying that your wife may have been murdered. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He walked through the house like a ghost, reliving Sarah's last days in the hospital, trying to remember details that had gone unnoticed at the time. He remembered how she had improved significantly in the week before her death, how the doctors were optimistic, how everything had changed overnight. The next morning, he looked for Michelle in the kitchen. She was preparing breakfast with mechanical movements, clearly as shaken as he was. Michelle, I need you to tell me everything you know about Dr. Vasconcelos, he said without preamble. Why? Did you find something? Maybe. But first, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Michelle looked around, checking if Dorothy or the children were nearby. I can't talk here. Lily might hear. Then let's go to the office. In the privacy of the office, Michelle revealed details that made Richard understand the extent of Dr. Vasconcelos's dangerousness. He doesn't act alone, she began. He has a network of people working for him, nurses, technicians, even some police officers. Anyone who tries to report him simply disappears. What do you mean, disappears? 2 years ago, a nurse named Mary tried to deliver evidence to the district attorney. A week later, she had a car accident. Too much of a coincidence, don't you think? Richard noted everything meticulously. And you're sure Danny disappeared because of this? Almost sure. In the last weeks before disappearing, he was receiving strange calls. People who said they knew our address, that they knew where Lily studied, where I worked. Danny was terrified. Why didn't you leave town? With what money? And where to? Dr. Vasconcelos has influence throughout the region. Besides, I hoped that if we stayed quiet, he would leave us alone. But he didn't. No. And now I'm sure he knows where I am. At that moment, as if invoked by the conversation, Michelle's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She looked at Richard with terror in her eyes. Answer it, he said. I'll listen. With trembling hands, Michelle answered the call, putting it on speakerphone. Michelle Baker? The voice was male, firm, intimidating. Who is this? Someone who knows where you're living now. Very nice house, isn't it? With a pool, a garden, and 2 children playing in the backyard. Michelle paled. What do you want? Dr. Vasconcelos wants to talk to you. Today at 3 in the afternoon in the parking lot of the Asheville Mall. Come alone. And if I don't go? It would be a shame if something happened to your children or to your new boss. Richard Sterling, isn't it? The call ended, leaving a heavy silence in the office. Michelle was shaking, and Richard felt a fury he hadn't experienced in years. You're not going to this meeting, he said categorically. I have to go. He threatened you, threatened the children. I'm not going to let you meet alone with that man. Then what do you suggest? Richard picked up the phone and dialed Robert. Robert, I need you to come here now and bring contacts in the FBI. We have a situation. While they waited for Robert to arrive, Richard took steps to protect the family. He called a private security company, hiring guards to watch the property. He asked Dorothy to take the children to the house of one of her cousins, far from Asheville. And above all, he began to develop a plan to expose Dr. Vasconcelos once and for all. Michelle, he said when he finished the calls, do you still have the evidence you collected at the hospital? Some. I hid it in an email account I created especially for that. Perfect. Let's use that. Robert arrived accompanied by an FBI agent, Agent Charles Magellan, a serious man who listened attentively to Michelle's account. Ms. Baker, these accusations are very serious, said the agent. We'll need more than your word to open an investigation. I have evidence, she replied, opening Richard's laptop. Photos of expired medications being used, records of surgeries that were charged but not performed, falsified documents. Agent Magellan examined the material with growing interest. This is enough to start an investigation, but we'll need you to collaborate with us. How? Go to the meeting with Dr. Vasconcelos, but using a recorder. I need him to incriminate himself. That's too dangerous, protested Richard. It's risky, agreed the agent. But it may be our only chance to catch him. He's very cautious, never leaves traces, but if you can get him to talk. Michelle looked at Richard, then at the agent. And if it goes wrong? It won't, said Richard with a determination that surprised everyone. Because I'll be there too. How? Dr. Vasconcelos doesn't know me personally. I can be at the mall as any customer. If something goes wrong... Richard, you can't get involved in this, protested Robert. It's too dangerous. "I'm already involved," replied Richard. "This man killed my wife, destroyed Michelle's life, made Danny disappear, threatened innocent children. It's about time someone stopped him." That afternoon, Michelle headed to the Asheville Mall with a small recorder hidden in her purse and her heart beating like a drum. Richard was positioned at a table in the restaurant on the upper floor, from where he could observe the parking lot. Agent Magellan and his team were disguised in strategic locations. At 3 o'clock sharp, a middle-aged man, well-dressed, approached Michelle. Dr. Aurelius Vasconcelos was exactly as she remembered, elegant, confident, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Michelle, what a pleasure to see you again," he said, as if they were old friends. "Where is Danny?" she asked directly. Straight to the point. "I like that. Danny is fine, don't worry. But your situation depends entirely on you. What do you want?" "I want you to stop spreading lies about my hospital. I want you to stop investigating things that are none of your business. And above all, I want you to stop involving innocent people in your problems." "Innocent people like Richard Sterling?" Dr. Vasconcelos smiled coldly. "Richard Sterling isn't as innocent as he seems. He's stirring up deep waters. And if he continues, he may end up like his wife." It was at that moment that Michelle realized she had underestimated the coldness of that man, and that, perhaps, not even the protection of the FBI would be enough to stop him. "You admitted you killed Sarah," said Michelle, trying to keep her voice steady, while the recorder in her purse captured every word. Dr. Vasconcelos chuckled, a sound that made Michelle's skin crawl. "I didn't admit anything, my dear. I merely commented on the consequences of meddling where you're not wanted. Where is my husband? Danny is in a safe place, resting, a place where he can reflect on his wife's choices." Dr. Vasconcelos leaned closer, his voice becoming threatening. "He can continue resting indefinitely, or he can come home today. It's up to you." From the restaurant on the upper floor, Richard watched the conversation with clenched fists. He could see Dr. Vasconcelos's intimidating body language, the way Michelle tried to remain brave despite her obvious fear. His instinct was to go down and confront the doctor directly, but he knew that would ruin the whole operation. "What do I need to do?" Michelle asked. "First, you're going to stop spreading these fanciful stories about my hospital. Second, you're going to convince your new employer to stop investigating my life. And third," Dr. Vasconcelos paused, savoring the moment, "you're going to come back to work for me." "What do you mean?" "I need someone with your skills, someone who understands nursing, who can care for special patients without asking inconvenient questions." Michelle felt her stomach churn. "What kind of patients?" "People who need to disappear for a while. People like your husband." The confession was exactly what Charles Magellan had been waiting for. From his disguised post near the food court, he gave a discreet signal to his team. But Dr. Vasconcelos was smarter than they had imagined. His experienced eyes noticed suspicious movements in the mall, faces that didn't fit the typical profile of shoppers on a Wednesday afternoon. "Michelle," he said softly, "did you bring friends to our conversation?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Dr. Vasconcelos stood up calmly. "You think I'm an amateur? I've been in this business for 15 years. I recognize undercover cops from miles away." At that moment, Dr. Vasconcelos's cell phone rang. He answered without taking his eyes off Michelle. "Yes? Ah, perfect. It's time then." He hung up and smiled coldly. "Michelle, my dear, you've just made a very serious mistake." "What mistake?" "Thinking you could fool me." Dr. Vasconcelos made an almost imperceptible gesture, and Michelle realized that people were positioning themselves strategically around them. "Let's do this. You're coming with me now, or your children will have a very tragic accident." "My children aren't here," Michelle said, trying to sound confident. "Aren't they? Are you sure?" Dr. Vasconcelos showed her the screen of his cell phone, where a video showed Lily and Ethan playing in the backyard of Dorothy Johnson's cousin's house. My friends are very efficient at finding people. From the upper floor, Richard saw that the situation had gotten out of control. Charles Magellan was trying to approach, but there were too many people involved, too many innocent civilians who could get hurt if there was a confrontation. It was then that an unexpected twist happened. Dr. Aurelius Vasconcelos. The voice came from behind him, calm but firm. The doctor turned and saw a middle-aged man, thin, with stubble and simple clothes. There was something familiar about that face, but Dr. Vasconcelos couldn't immediately identify him. "Who are you?" "My name is Danny Barbosa, and you kidnapped the wrong person." The shock on Michelle's face was total. Danny was there, alive, but visibly worn. He had lost weight, his skin was pale, and he limped slightly. "Danny!" Michelle tried to run towards him, but Dr. Vasconcelos held her by the arm. "How did you escape?" the doctor asked, clearly disturbed. "I didn't escape," Danny replied. "I was released. By someone you didn't expect." At that moment, an elegant woman of about 50 approached the group. Richard recognized her immediately from the upper floor. It was Dr. Marissa Teixeira, Administrative Director of St. Joseph's Hospital. "Aurelius," she said in a firm voice, "it's over." "Marissa, what are you doing here?" "What I should have done years ago, turning you over to the authorities." Dr. Vasconcelos looked around and realized he was surrounded. Charles Magellan and his team were approaching from all directions, and now there was a witness he didn't expect. "You're making a mistake, Marissa," he said, trying to maintain control. "You're involved in this as much as I am." "Was," she corrected. "But unlike you, I still have a conscience." It was then that Richard came down the stairs and joined the group, no longer able to just watch. "Dr. Vasconcelos," he said, stopping a few feet from the doctor. "Remember me?" "Doctor." Vasconcelos studied Richard's face, and slowly recognition appeared in his eyes. "Richard Sterling, Sarah's husband. The husband of the woman you murdered." "I didn't murder anyone. Your wife died of natural complications." "That's a lie," said Dr. Marissa. "I saw the documents you falsified. I saw the medications you substituted. Sarah Sterling was recovering until you intervened." The administrative director's public confession was the last nail in Dr. Vasconcelos's coffin. Charles Magellan approached with handcuffs in his hands. "Dr. Aurelius Vasconcelos, you are under arrest for homicide, kidnapping, racketeering, and corruption." But Dr. Vasconcelos had one last trump card up his sleeve. "You think arresting me is going to solve anything," he said, as the handcuffs were placed. "You have no idea how deep this goes, how many people are involved, how many politicians, how many judges, how many deputies. That's why you're going to cooperate with us," said Charles Magellan. "You're going to hand over all your accomplices." Dr. Vasconcelos laughed bitterly. "Cooperate? You don't understand. I'm just a small fish in this ocean, and small fish that make too many waves, well, they tend to disappear." At that moment, Michelle finally managed to hug Danny. He was alive, he was hurt, but he was alive. Her tears of relief mingled with anger at the torture they had been through. "How did you manage to escape?" she asked. "I didn't escape," Danny explained, looking at Dr. Marissa. "She released me, said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore." Dr. Marissa approached Michelle. "I apologize for everything you've been through. I should have acted a long time ago." "Why didn't you act?" "Fear. Dr. Vasconcelos had evidence against me too. Things that could destroy me professionally. But when he kidnapped Danny, when he started threatening children, I realized there were limits I couldn't cross." Richard watched everything with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Dr. Vasconcelos had been arrested. Danny was alive. Michelle and the children were safe. But the doctor's final words worried him. If he really was just a small fish in a larger operation, that meant the danger wasn't over yet. Charles Magellan approached Richard. "Mr. Sterling, we're going to need your formal statement and the evidence you've collected." "Of course, but Dr. Vasconcelos was right about one thing." "About what?" about there being other people involved, people who are going to want revenge when they find out he's been arrested. Charles Magellan nodded gravely. It's a possibility. We're going to offer protection to all of you until we're sure the network has been completely dismantled. As Dr. Vasconcelos was being taken away by the FBI, Michelle held Danny's hand and watched Richard talking to the agents. There was something different about him now, a determination she hadn't seen before, as if arresting Dr. Vasconcelos was just the first step of a larger journey. And she was right, because in the coming weeks they would discover that Dr. Vasconcelos really was just the tip of a much larger iceberg, and that the real battle was just beginning. 2 weeks after Dr. Vasconcelos's arrest, life at Richard's mansion had found a new rhythm, but not exactly the rhythm of peace. Danny was slowly recovering from the 3 months in captivity, spending his days too quiet, haunted by memories he preferred not to share with anyone. Michelle divided her time between caring for her traumatized husband and trying to maintain a semblance of normality for the children. Richard, in turn, had turned into a person obsessed with justice. He spent hours on the phone with Charles Magellan, Robert and other contacts, trying to map the extent of the corruption network that Dr. Vasconcelos had mentioned. His textile mill, formerly the center of his life, now received only a fraction of his attention. "You're killing yourself working," Dorothy said one morning, watching Richard drink his 3rd coffee while talking on the phone. "It's not work, Dorothy. It's justice. Justice won't bring Sarah back." Dorothy's observation hit Richard hard. She was right, but he couldn't stop. It was as if all the anger and guilt accumulated in the 5 years since his wife's death had finally found a channel, and now he could no longer control them. That afternoon, while Michelle was helping Lily with her homework at the kitchen table, Danny approached her with a serious expression. "Michelle, I need to tell you something about the time I was imprisoned." She raised her eyes from her daughter's notebooks. "What is it?" "Dr. Vasconcelos didn't keep me alone. There were other people there. Other people like patients who supposedly had died in the hospital, people that their families believe are buried, but who were actually being kept alive for—" Danny hesitated, clearly disturbed by the memory. "For what, Danny?" "For medical tests, experiments, things that I can't even describe properly." Lily's pencil stopped moving on the paper. The girl was listening, even pretending to be focused on her schoolwork. "Where is this place?" "An abandoned clinic on the outskirts of Charlotte. But Michelle—" Danny took his wife's hand. "When Dr. Vasconcelos was arrested, I heard his guards talking. They were going to kill all the people who were there, to leave no evidence." Michelle felt her blood run cold. "Did you tell the FBI this?" "I tried. But when they got there, the place was empty, burned down. Nothing left." At that moment, Richard entered the kitchen and noticed the tension in the room. "What's going on?" Michelle related what Danny had said, and Richard felt a familiar fury growing in his chest. "They killed the evidence." "Looks like it," confirmed Danny. "And there's more. One of the guards mentioned a name during the conversations. Someone who was coordinating the operation. Someone more powerful than Dr. Vasconcelos." "Who?" "Judge Freitas. Apparently, he's the one who was behind everything." The name hit Richard like lightning. Judge Caetano Freitas was one of the most respected figures in the judiciary of North Carolina, known for his integrity and rigor. He was also Sarah's godfather, a close friend of her family for decades. "That's impossible," Richard murmured. "Why is it impossible?" Michelle asked. "Because Caetano Freitas was a family friend. He was the one who consoled me when Sarah died. He was the one who took care of all the legal procedures, who made everything easier for me." The realization was like a punch to the stomach. If Caetano was involved in the operation, that meant he had participated in Sarah's murder and then had consoled her widowed husband, knowing exactly what he had done. "Richard," Michelle said softly, "you need to tell Charles Magellan this." "How am I going to tell him, based on Danny's testimony?" "They'll say he's traumatized. that he may be confusing things. Then, let's find other evidence. That night, while the family slept, Richard locked himself in his office and began to review all the documents related to Sarah's death. Now, with the knowledge that Caetano could be involved, he saw inconsistencies that had previously gone unnoticed. Why had Caetano insisted so much that Sarah be treated specifically at St. Joseph's Hospital? Why had he offered to take care of all the life insurance paperwork? Why had he discouraged Richard from questioning the doctors about the treatment? The next morning, Richard called Robert with a renewed determination. "Robert, I need you to investigate Judge Caetano Freitas." "Richard, are you sure about what you're asking?" "Caetano Freitas is practically untouchable in the North Carolina judiciary. That's exactly why. Who better to coordinate a criminal operation than someone above suspicion? But if we're wrong, what if we're right?" Robert sighed on the other end of the line. "It's going to be very difficult. Caetano has protections that Dr. Vasconcelos never dreamed of having. Then let's be smarter." That afternoon, Richard made a decision that surprised everyone. He invited Caetano to dinner at his house. "You've completely lost your mind," Michelle said when she heard about the invitation. "If he really is behind everything, that's exactly why I need to do this. I need to look him in the eyes and be sure. What if he finds out you suspect him? Then at least we'll know where we stand." Caetano Freitas arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, driving his black Mercedes and wearing an impeccable suit. He was an imposing man, 65 years old, with well-groomed grey hair and a presence that commanded respect. "Richard, my friend," he said, embracing the host warmly. "It's been too long since we've seen each other." "Too long, Caetano. Come in, please." During the dinner prepared by Dorothy, Caetano proved to be the same elegant and polite man that Richard had always known. He asked about business, praised the food, told amusing anecdotes about his colleagues at the court. It seemed impossible that this cultured man was capable of the crimes that Danny had described. But then, when the conversation inevitably came to the subject of Dr. Vasconcelos's arrest, something changed in Caetano's eyes. "I heard you got involved in this unpleasant situation," he said, delicately cutting a piece of meat. "How did I get involved, Caetano?" "Well, by giving shelter to the nurse who was causing problems for Aurelius. Michelle, isn't it?" The way he said Michelle's name made Richard shiver. There was something predatory in his voice. "Michelle is my employee, and an honest person who was unjustly persecuted." "Honest?" Caetano chuckled. "Richard, my friend, you've always been very naive. That woman caused serious problems for a reputable hospital, made unfounded accusations, damaged the reputation of competent doctors. The accusations were not unfounded. Dr. Vasconcelos confessed. Dr. Vasconcelos was under pressure. He said what you wanted to hear." It was at that moment that Richard was sure. Caetano knew too many details about the situation, defended Dr. Vasconcelos with a vehemence that didn't make sense for someone neutral. "Caetano," Richard said carefully, "did you know Dr. Vasconcelos well?" "I knew him professionally. He did some work for me over the years." "What kind of work?" Caetano paused, realizing that he might have said too much. "Medical consultations. Nothing major." "Consultations for what?" "Richard, I think we should change the subject. You're getting involved in things that could be dangerous." "Dangerous like? Like what happened to Sarah?" The words slipped out of Caetano's mouth before he could control them. In the silence that followed, both men understood that the mask had finally fallen. "What did you mean by that, Caetano?" Caetano placed the fork and knife on the plate with deliberately slow movements. "I meant that people who ask too many questions sometimes find answers they would have preferred not to have discovered. You were involved in my wife's death." "I was trying to save your wife, Richard. But she discovered things she shouldn't have discovered." The confession came so casually that Richard almost didn't believe what he had heard. "What do you mean, she discovered?" "Sarah was very intelligent. During her hospital stays, she began to notice inconsistencies in her treatment. She asked inconvenient questions, tried to access documents she shouldn't see. She became a problem. So, you killed her. We tried to dissuade her, offered treatment in other hospitals, even outside the country. But she insisted on investigating. In the end, Caetano shrugged, it was a business decision. Richard felt a fury he had never experienced in his entire life. The man sitting across from him had ordered the murder of his wife and then had attended the funeral, consoled him, helped him with the bureaucracy, all this knowing exactly what he had done. "You're a monster," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "I'm a practical man," Caetano corrected, "and you're going to be practical too. You're going to stop this ridiculous investigation, you're going to dismiss this family you're sheltering, and you're going to go back to your quiet life as a successful businessman. And if I don't do that," Caetano smiled coldly, "then you'll find that accidents can happen to anyone, even innocent children." Caetano's threat echoed in Richard's mind throughout the night. After the judge left, he gathered the whole family in the living room and told them what he had discovered. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. "We need to get out of town," Michelle said immediately. "Today." "Where to?" Danny asked. "Caetano has influence all over the southeast, and if we run, he'll know we discovered the truth. So what do you suggest? That we stay here waiting for him to carry out his threats?" Richard, who had remained quiet, finally spoke up. "We're not going to run. We're going to fight." "Richard, this man is a judge," Michelle protested. "He has the power to destroy us in ways we can't even imagine." "And I have something he doesn't have," Richard replied. "What?" "The recording of his confession." Michelle's eyes widened. "You recorded the conversation?" "I recorded everything, from the moment he arrived until the moment he left." Richard showed the small digital recorder he had hidden under the dining table. "We have him confessing that he ordered Sarah's death, that he coordinates the entire operation. But who's going to believe us? Who's going to have the courage to go against a judge based on a recording that may be considered illegal?" It was Dorothy who gave the unexpected answer. "I know someone who can help." Everyone turned to her, surprised. "My sister Josephine has worked for 20 years as a secretary in the U.S. Attorney's Office. She knows federal prosecutors who aren't on anyone's payroll, honest people who are waiting for a chance to clean up the judiciary." "Are you sure we can trust her?" Richard asked. "Josephine raised 4 children alone after her husband died. She's worked double her whole life to give them an education. If there's one person in this world who hates corruption, it's my sister." The next morning, Dorothy brought Josephine to the mansion. She was a thin woman, 50 years old, with black hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that seemed capable of piercing anyone's soul. "Dorothy told me about your situation," she said without preamble. "I can help, but you need to understand the risks." "What risks?" Richard asked. "Caetano Freitas isn't just a corrupt judge. He's the center of a network that includes judges, prosecutors, deputies, and politicians throughout the state. If you attack him and fail, there will be nowhere to hide. And if we don't attack, then he'll kill you anyway. Men like Caetano don't leave live witnesses." Josephine listened carefully to the recording of Caetano's confession, making detailed notes. When she finished, she looked at the group with a serious expression. "This is enough to open a federal investigation. But we need more evidence to ensure that he doesn't escape." "What kind of evidence?" "Documents, financial records, other witnesses. Caetano is cautious, but 15 years of operation leave traces." It was then that Michelle had an idea. "Dr. Marisa Teixeira. She knows details of the operation that we can't even imagine." "Where is she?" "Under house arrest, awaiting trial." Josephine smiled for the first time since arriving. "Perfect. A person under house arrest is much more willing to cooperate. I'll talk to federal prosecutor Henry Matthews. He's one of the few who isn't for sale." While Josephine worked her contacts in Raleigh, something unexpected happened in Asheville. Theodore Sterling, Richard's brother-in-law, appeared at the mansion in the afternoon, visibly nervous. "Richard, I need to talk to you," he said, refusing to enter the house. "It's urgent." "What is it, Theodore?" "I received a visit this morning. 2 men in suits, very polite, very dangerous. They wanted to know about you, about this family you're sheltering." Richard felt his blood run cold. "What did you tell them?" "I said I didn't know anything, but they left a message." "What?" "That you have until tomorrow at noon to dismiss the family and stop causing trouble. Otherwise—" "Otherwise what?" "Otherwise your textile mill may suffer a very tragic fire, and accidents can happen to people close to you." Theodore looked nervously around before continuing. "Richard, I know you've never gotten along, but you're my brother-in-law. Stop this madness before it's too late." "Why are you warning me? I thought you'd be happy if something happened to me." Theodore lowered his eyes, ashamed. Because Sarah asked me to take care of you if something happened to her. It was one of the last things she told me." The revelation left Richard speechless. Sarah had foreseen that something could happen to her and had tried to protect him even after her own death. Sarah knew she was in danger. She knew. In recent weeks, she'd been very worried. She said she had discovered bad things about people she trusted. Said that if anything happened to her, I should keep an eye on you. At that moment, Richard understood that Sarah had been more courageous than he imagined. She had investigated the corruption, knowing the risks, had tried to protect him, even knowing she could die for it. "Theodore, I need you to help me with something." "I can't get involved in this, Richard. I have a family to protect. I'm not asking you to get involved. I just need you to deliver something to someone." Richard ran into the house and returned with a sealed envelope. "If anything happens to me, deliver this to Josephine Santos. She's Dorothy's sister." "What's in this envelope?" "Evidence. Everything we've discovered about Caetano and his operation." Theodore took the envelope with trembling hands. "Are you sure about what you're doing? I'm sure I can't live knowing who killed my wife and not do anything about it." That night the family gathered to make a crucial decision. Josephine had managed to schedule a meeting with the federal prosecutor for the next day, but Caetano had given an ultimatum for noon. "We have a few hours head start," Richard said. "If we leave at dawn—" "No," Michelle interrupted. "We're not running again." "Michelle, think about the children." "I'm thinking about them. What future will they have if they grow up knowing that we ran when we should have fought?" Danny, who had remained quiet throughout the discussion, finally spoke up. "Michelle's right. I spent 3 months watching innocent people being tortured and killed. If we run now, those deaths will have been in vain." "Then it's decided," Richard said. "We're going to rally in the early morning. But first, let's take some precautions." He called Robert and asked the lawyer to hire private security guards to protect the textile mill and the mansion. He called Charles Magellan and informed him about the threats, asking for federal protection. And mainly, he made copies of all the evidence and distributed them among trusted people. "If Caetano wants war," he said, looking out the window at the city that had been his home his entire life, "then it's war he's going to get." But none of them were prepared for what would happen in the next few hours, because Caetano Freitas hadn't reached the position he occupied by being impatient or giving his enemies a chance to organize. At 2 in the morning, when the family slept protected by Richard's security guards, 3 black cars positioned themselves discreetly around the mansion. Armed and trained men awaited the signal for an operation that Caetano had planned in minute detail. The war that Richard had declared was about to begin, and the first blow would be much more devastating than any of them could imagine. The sound of breaking glass woke the whole house at 3 in the morning. Richard jumped out of bed and ran to the window, seeing dark figures moving through the garden. The security guards he had hired lay motionless near the gate, not dead, but clearly incapacitated. "Michelle! Danny! Wake up!" he shouted, running down the hall. "Get the children!" The house filled with screams and confusion. Lily woke up crying, Ethan babbled in his crib, and Dorothy appeared in the hallway in her nightgown, trying to understand what was happening. "Get out through the back," Richard ordered. "Go to the neighbor's house and call the police." "What about you?" Michelle asked, holding Ethan in her arms while Danny carried Lily. "I'm going to buy you time to escape. I'm not leaving you here alone." "Michelle, for God's sake, think about the children." At that moment, the front door was violently kicked in. Masked men invaded the house, moving with military precision. They weren't common thugs. They were professionals hired for a specific job. "Everyone on the ground!" one of them shouted, pointing a gun at the group. Richard positioned himself in front of the family, his arms open in a protective gesture. "What do you want?" "We want you to stop causing trouble," replied the leader of the group, a tall and muscular man. "Our boss was very clear about that." "Caetano sent you?" "Our boss prefers to resolve things in a civilized way." "But you forced his hand." It was then that something unexpected happened. Dorothy, who had remained quiet in the corner of the room, took a step forward. "I know you," she said, pointing to one of the invaders who had taken off his mask. "You're Mark, Mrs. News's son from the market." The man stopped, clearly uncomfortable at being recognized. "Dorothy, what are you doing here? I've worked here for 10 years. And you, boy? Shame on you. Your mother would be disappointed if she knew." "Dorothy, this is none of your business," Mark said, but his voice had lost all authority. "Of course, it's my business. These people are family to me." The leader of the group was irritated by the interruption. "Mark, finish this quickly." "Wait a minute, boss. This lady has known me since I was a kid. So what? Business is business." It was at this moment that sirens began to sound in the distance. Someone had called the police, and they were arriving quickly. "Damn!" cursed the leader. "You're lucky, but this isn't over." The men began to retreat, but before leaving, the leader threw an object on the floor of the room. It was a photo of Lily leaving school. "Next time there will be no warnings," he said before disappearing into the night. When the police arrived, they found the family shaken but unharmed. The security guards had been drugged, not injured, and it was clear that it had been an operation of intimidation, not elimination. "Why didn't they kill us?" Michelle asked, still trembling. "Because Caetano is smart," Richard replied. "If he killed an entire family at once, he would draw too much attention. He prefers psychological pressure." The deputy who attended the scene, Mr. Santos, listened to the report with obvious skepticism. "You're accusing a judge of ordering an invasion. This is very serious." "We have evidence," Richard said, but Mr. Santos made a dismissive gesture. "Evidence or not, these are very serious accusations against a respected authority. I'm going to register the incident as a home invasion for reasons to be determined." Richard realized that the deputy was also on Caetano's payroll. The network of corruption was even larger than they had imagined. After the police left, the family gathered in the kitchen to make a decision. It was obvious that they could no longer stay at the mansion. "Josephine said she has a safe house in Raleigh," Dorothy informed. "I can call her." "No," Richard said. "If we go to Raleigh, we're going to be walking straight into the lion's den. Caetano has more power there than here." "Then what do we do?" It was Michelle who suggested the unexpected solution. "Let's go to Wilmington." "North Carolina?" "Why?" "Because I have a cousin there who works for the FBI, someone I can trust completely, and mainly because it's outside of Caetano's area of influence." "Michelle, you never mentioned this cousin." "Because I never needed to. Marina graduated from law school with me, joined the FBI 5 years ago. She's one of the few people I trust completely." Richard weighed the options. Staying in Asheville was impossible. Going to Raleigh was dangerous. Wilmington seemed like the best alternative. "Okay, but how are we going to get there without being intercepted?" "My cousin has a moving truck," Danny said. "We can go hidden in the back." "That's too risky. What about the children?" "It's riskier to stay here," Michelle replied. The next morning, while they were making preparations for the trip, Richard received a call that changed everything. "Richard, this is Josephine. I have bad news." "What happened?" "Federal prosecutor Henry Matthews has been transferred to Washington, D.C. on an emergency basis, and Dr. Marissa Teixeira died under house arrest." "What do you mean, died?" "Sudden cardiac arrest. Very convenient, don't you think?" Richard felt the floor collapsing under his feet. His two main witnesses had been neutralized in less than 24 hours. "Caetano is cleaning up the evidence," he murmured. "Exactly. And you're next on the list." "What now?" "Without the prosecutor and without Dr. Marissa, we still have the recording, but we need someone brave enough to use it." "Who?" "Leave that to me. But you need to get out of town today." That afternoon, disguised as an ordinary moving family, they left Asheville in the back of Danny's cousin's truck. Lily and Ethan were hidden among the furniture, thinking it was all a great adventure. Michelle and Danny held hands, trying to convey confidence they didn't feel. Richard watched the city they were leaving behind through the small rear window, wondering if he would ever return. Dorothy had decided to stay to take care of the house and maintain appearances. "Someone needs to stay to welcome you when you come back," she had said, trying to sound optimistic. The trip to Wilmington took 10 hours, with strategic stops to avoid toll booths where they could be recognized. When they finally arrived in Wilmington, it was already night. Marina Ferreira was waiting for them in a simple house on the outskirts of the historic city. She was a 30-year-old woman, brunette, with intelligent eyes and a demeanor that inspired confidence. "Michelle," she said, hugging her cousin, "you've gotten yourself into quite a mess. Do you believe us?" "I do. And I have colleagues in Washington who will be very interested in what you have to tell." That night, while the children slept safely for the first time in days, the adults planned the next phase of the operation. Marina had contacted the National Judicial Conduct Commission, which had the authority to investigate judges. "But you need to understand," she warned, "from now on, there's no turning back. If we file a formal complaint against Caetano, he will use all his power to destroy us." "And if we don't file," Michelle asked, "then he'll kill us anyway. Men like Caetano don't leave live witnesses." It was then that Richard made the decision that would define the fate of them all. "Then let's end this, once and for all. I want Caetano Freitas to pay for killing my wife. And I want all the families who have lost loved ones because of him to have justice. Even knowing that we can lose everything." "We already lost everything when Sarah died," Richard replied. "Now all that's left is justice." The next morning, Marina filed the formal complaint with the National Judicial Conduct Commission. The war against Caetano Freitas had officially begun, and this time there would be no retreat. The formal complaint against Caetano Freitas with the National Judicial Conduct Commission had an immediate and devastating effect. In less than 48 hours, Marina received a call from her superiors ordering her immediate transfer to an operation in Alaska. It was obvious that Caetano's influence reached as far as Washington, D.C. "They're trying to get me out of the way," Marina told the family gathered at the safe house. "But I managed to get a hearing with the National Commissioner before I leave. You have 24 hours. 24 hours for what?" Michelle asked. "To convince the most powerful man in the American judiciary that a respected judge is actually a murderer." The pressure was overwhelming. Richard spent the night organizing all the evidence: the recording of Caetano's confession, Danny's testimony about his captivity, the documents that Michelle had managed to save from the hospital, the inconsistencies in Sarah's death. "It's not going to be enough," Danny said, watching the materials spread out on the table. "It's a lot based on our word against his." "Then we need something more," Richard replied. It was Michelle who had the decisive idea. "Theodore, what do you mean?" "Your brother-in-law said that Sarah had asked him to take care of you. Maybe she left something with him, some evidence she hid before she died." Richard hesitated. Calling Theodore meant putting him in danger, but it could also be the only chance to find the definitive proof they needed. I'll call him. The conversation was tense and quick. Theodore was visibly nervous, speaking softly as if he feared being overheard. "Richard, have you gone crazy? After what happened at your house, the whole town is talking. Caetano is furious. Theodore, I need to know if Sarah left anything with you. Documents, letters, anything. Why would she leave anything? Because she knew she was in danger. You yourself said she asked you to take care of me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "There is one thing." "What?" 2 weeks before she died, Sarah gave me a flash drive. She said that if anything happened to her, I should give it to the FBI. Richard's heart skipped a beat. "Do you still have that flash drive?" "I do. But Richard, after what happened at your house, strange men appeared at my company too. They're watching everything." "Where did you hide the flash drive?" "In Sarah's grave, inside the flower vase that's always there." The irony was almost poetic. The evidence that could destroy Caetano was hidden in the tomb of the woman he had murdered. "Theodore, I need you to get that flash drive and give it to Marina Ferreira of the FBI. "Are you crazy? If they see me at the cemetery, then we'll go." "You? Going back to Asheville is suicide. It's our only chance." That night, while Marina finalized the preparations for the hearing with the National Commissioner, Richard, Michelle, and Danny left for Asheville. The children stayed in Wilmington with one of Marina's colleagues, protected and safe. The trip back was an emotional roller coaster. Michelle wondered if she would ever have a normal life again. Danny struggled with the traumatic memories that returned as they approached the city where he had been kidnapped. Richard thought about Sarah, imagining how she had been brave enough to investigate Caetano, knowing she could die for it. They arrived in Asheville at dawn, using back roads to avoid roadblocks. The city slept peacefully, unaware that a crucial battle was taking place in its shadows. The cemetery was on a hill on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by ancient walls and iron gates. At 3 in the morning, it was completely deserted, illuminated only by the full moon that filtered through the ancient trees. Sarah's grave was at the highest part of the cemetery, under a jabuticaba tree that she had personally chosen years before when they bought the burial plot. "I want to be in a beautiful place," she had said, without imagining that she would use the place so soon. Richard knelt before the white marble tombstone, his hands trembling as he rummaged in the flower vase. "I'm sorry, my love," he whispered. "I hope you understand." The flash drive was there, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture. When Richard held it in his hands, he felt as if Sarah were there with him, guiding him in the search for justice. "We did it," Michelle said, hugging him. But the celebration was short-lived. Car headlights began to climb the road leading to the cemetery, and the sound of engines approached rapidly. "They found us," Danny said. "How?" Michelle asked. "Theodore," Richard realized bitterly. "He must have told Caetano." 3 black cars surrounded the cemetery, and armed men jumped out, moving with military precision. It was a well-coordinated operation, obviously planned in advance. "Come out with your hands up!" shouted an amplified voice. Richard hid the flash drive in the inner pocket of his jacket and stood up slowly. "Do what they say," he whispered to Michelle and Danny. The men approached cautiously, clearly experienced in situations like this. The leader was the same as the one from the mansion invasion, but this time he wasn't interested in intimidation. "Do you really think you can escape Judge Freitas?" he said, pointing the gun at Richard. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "We know exactly who we're messing with," Richard replied. "A murderer who hides behind a robe. A murderer who has enough power to make you disappear without a trace." At that moment, sirens began to sound in the distance, but this time they weren't from the local police. They were FBI vehicles, and they were approaching quickly. The leader frowned, clearly not expecting this interference. "How?" "Because the FBI isn't on Caetano's payroll," said a familiar voice. Marina Ferreira came out from behind a mausoleum, accompanied by a team of federal agents. She had returned from Washington, D.C., and coordinated the operation to protect the family. "Marina, how are you here?" Michelle asked. "I managed to convince my superiors that this operation was a priority. And mainly, I managed to contact someone in Washington who isn't afraid of Caetano." Caetano's men found themselves surrounded and outnumbered. The leader hesitated, clearly assessing his options. "Drop your weapons," Marina ordered. "You are surrounded." It was then that the leader made a desperate decision. Instead of surrendering, he pointed the gun directly at Richard. "If I can't fulfill the mission, at least I'll eliminate the main problem." Time seemed to slow down. Michelle screamed. Danny tried to throw himself in front of Richard. Marina and her agents moved their weapons. But it was a fourth person who changed the course of events. Theodore appeared running between the graves, shouting, "Stop! Stop this!" The distraction was enough for the federal agents to dominate the situation. The leader was disarmed and arrested, along with his accomplices. "Theodore," Richard said, confused, "you didn't give away our location." "Of course not," replied his brother-in-law, panting. "When you called me, I realized I was being watched. That's why it took me so long to answer. I had to find a way to shake them off." "So how did Caetano know where we were?" "He didn't know," explained Marina. "We leaked the information on purpose. We wanted to catch his men red-handed. You used us as bait? It was the only way to get enough evidence to arrest not only Caetano, but his entire network." Richard looked at the flash drive in his hands, then at Sarah's grave. "I hope it was worth it, my love," he murmured. The next morning in Washington, D.C., the National Commissioner of Justice opened the file that Sarah had compiled in secret for months. Documents that proved not only Caetano's corruption, but of a network that included dozens of authorities throughout the Southeast. The scandal that followed would shake the American judiciary for years. But for Richard, Michelle, and their family, the real victory would be to finally live in peace, knowing that justice had prevailed. The contents of Sarah's flash drive exceeded all expectations. For 3 months before her death, she had systematically documented Caetano's entire operation. Records of payments to corrupt doctors, lists of patients who had disappeared, suspicious financial transactions, and mainly secret recordings of telephone conversations where Caetano coordinated murders and kidnappings. "Your wife was an extraordinary woman," said the National Commissioner of Justice during a video conference with Marina and the family. "This evidence is sufficient to dismantle not only Caetano's operation, but the entire associated corruption network." "When will he be arrested?" Richard asked. "He already has been. 2 hours ago, a special team of the FBI arrested Caetano Freitas at his mansion in Raleigh. He tried to resist, claiming immunity, but the evidence is irrefutable." The news of the arrest spread like wildfire throughout the Southeast. Newspapers headlined the biggest corruption scandal ever uncovered in the region's judiciary. Corrupt prosecutors, bought-off deputies, criminal doctors all began to be arrested in an operation that the media dubbed Operation Final Justice. But for the family, the victory had a bittersweet taste. They had achieved justice, but at what cost? Months of terror, traumas that would take years to heal, and mainly the certainty that Sarah had died, knowing she was alone in an impossible battle. "She wasn't alone," Michelle said when Richard expressed that feeling. "She knew you would continue the fight. That's why she left all that evidence. But I didn't continue for 5 years. I was complacent, pretending nothing had happened. Until we appeared in your life," said Lily, who now at 7 years old had developed a surprising wisdom. "Aunt Sarah knew you were going to help us. That's why she prepared everything." The simplicity of the girl's observation touched Richard deeply. Perhaps Sarah really had foreseen that he would find a new family to protect, and that this protection would lead him to seek the justice that she had not been able to achieve alone. In the weeks that followed, other revelations emerged. Dr. Vasconcelos, trying to reduce his sentence, cooperated with the authorities, revealing shocking details of the operation. There were at least 50 confirmed victims, people who had officially died, but who were actually being kept alive for illegal medical experiments. Many families will finally know the truth about what happened to their loved ones, Marina said during one of the meetings. You saved many more lives than you imagine, but the most impactful revelation came through an unexpected call that Michelle received one afternoon in August. Michelle, this is Mary. Michelle almost dropped the phone. Mary, but I thought you had died in a car accident? That's what everyone was supposed to believe. Actually, Dr. Vasconcelos held me prisoner for 2 years. I was freed when his operation was exposed. The former colleague was alive, traumatized but alive, and she brought with her additional evidence that helped definitively close the case against all those involved. How did you survive? Michelle asked during their emotional reunion. By pretending I had lost my memory. Dr. Vasconcelos believed the experiments had damaged my brain, so they kept me alive as a long-term guinea pig. It was horrible, but it allowed me to survive. Mary brought with her a complete list of all the victims of the operation, including details that allowed the authorities to locate bodies and give closure to dozens of families who had lost hope. During this period, something unexpected happened between Richard and the family that had taken him in. What began as a charitable gesture had transformed into genuine bonds of affection. Lily called him Godfather Richard. Ethan took his first steps following him around the house, and Michelle and Danny had become the closest friends he had. You don't have to stay here anymore, he said one afternoon when they finally returned to Asheville. You have enough money now to start over wherever you want. What if we don't want to leave? Michelle asked. What do you mean? This house has become our home. You have become our family. Why would we leave? Danny agreed. Richard, you saved us, but we also saved you. We were broken people who came together and became whole. It was Dorothy who formalized what everyone already knew in their hearts. This house was always meant for a big family. Sarah would be happy to know it's not empty anymore. The decision to formalize the situation came naturally. Richard offered Danny a partnership in Sterling Textiles, recognizing his administrative skills that had been revealed during the crisis. Michelle went back to school, this time studying law to work with Marina at the FBI. Lily became one of the best students in her class, dreaming of being a doctor to heal real people, not hurt them like those bad men. But it was during the first Christmas they spent together that the transformation was complete. The house that had been a silent mausoleum in memory of Sarah was filled again with laughter, music, and most importantly, hope. Do you think Sarah would approve of all this? Richard asked Dorothy as they watched the children play in the garden. I'm sure she would. Sarah always said that an empty house is a sad house. She would be happy to see you laughing again. I haven't laughed in 5 years. I know. And now you laugh every day. It was true. Richard had rediscovered not only joy, but a purpose that went beyond business and financial success. He had learned that family is not only who you are born with, but who chooses to stay with you in the most difficult moments. Michelle, watching him play with Ethan in the garden, reflected on the journey they had traveled. From a desperate woman begging for scraps of food to feed her children, she had become part of a loving family, was studying again, and most importantly, had helped bring justice to dozens of innocent victims. Mom, Lily said, approaching her, do you still miss when it was just the 3 of us? No, my daughter. Now there are more of us, and more is always better when it's more love. Danny, who was watching the conversation from afar, smiled. The 3 months of captivity had been a nightmare, but they had also taught him the value of every moment of peace, of every laugh from his daughters, of every hug from his wife. He had learned that happiness is not the absence of problems, but the presence of people who face the problems with you. That night, as the house prepared for sleep, Richard made his daily visit to the portrait of Sarah that still sat on the bedside table. But now, instead of sadness, He felt gratitude. "Thank you, my love," he whispered, "for fighting even when you were alone, for leaving the evidence we needed, and especially for preparing me to find a new family to love." Outside, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the garden where Lily was teaching Ethan how to count stars. It was the sound of life restarting, of hope being reborn, of justice finally prevailing. The war against Judge Freitas had ended, but the life they had built together was just beginning. 6 months after the fall of Judge Freitas, Asheville had been transformed. The scandal had reached the pages of national newspapers, and the city found itself at the center of a discussion about medical ethics and judicial corruption that echoed throughout the country. But for Richard's family, life had found a rhythm of peace that none of them had imagined possible. On that morning in February, the eve of Lily's 8th birthday, something unexpected happened. An elegant man, around 60 years old, appeared at the gate of the mansion asking to speak with Richard. "My name is Dr. Fernando Cavalcanti," he said when Dorothy announced him. "I'm Sarah's cousin." Richard vaguely remembered him, a doctor who had studied abroad and settled in São Paulo. They had met only a few times, during Sarah's wedding and funeral. "Fernando, what a surprise! What brings you to Asheville?" "I read about the case in the newspapers." "About what you discovered about Sarah's death." Dr. Fernando seemed nervous, as if he were carrying a weight that he needed to share. "There's something you need to know. Something I should have told you years ago." Richard invited him in, sensing that this conversation would change something important. Michelle was in the kitchen preparing lunch, and the children were playing in the garden under the care of Danny, who now at almost 2 years old had become a smart and affectionate boy. "What is it about, Fernando?" "Sarah contacted me 2 weeks before she died. She was terrified, said she had discovered terrible things at the hospital where she was being treated." "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" Because at the time I thought they were delusions caused by the medication. Sarah was always very imaginative, and I thought the stress of the treatment was affecting her judgment." Richard felt a pang of pain. Even her closest relatives hadn't believed Sarah when she tried to ask for help. "What exactly did she tell you? That the doctors were killing patients on purpose? That there was an operation to falsify deaths and use people for experiments?" "She said she had evidence, that she had recorded conversations, photographed documents. And you didn't believe her." "I didn't believe her," admitted Dr. Fernando, his voice filled with remorse. "And now, after reading about Judge Freitas and Dr. Vasconcelos, I realized that she was trying to warn me that maybe I could have saved her." "Fernando, you couldn't have known." "Yes, I could have," he burst out. "I've been a doctor for 30 years. I should have recognized the signs. I should have investigated. Instead, I advised her to trust the doctors, to stop asking inconvenient questions." The conversation was interrupted by Lily, who came running into the room with a drawing in her hands. "Godfather Richard, look what I made for my party tomorrow." The drawing showed the whole family gathered around a cake, including a female figure in the sky that clearly represented Sarah. "It's Aunt Sarah watching over us from above," explained the girl naturally. Dr. Fernando observed the drawing with teary eyes. "Who is this child?" "Lily is, well, she's my daughter at heart," explained Richard, "just like Ethan." "And the parents?" "Michelle and Danny. They live here with us. We became a family." Dr. Fernando studied Richard with new understanding. "Sarah would be happy to know that you found a new family to love. That's what everyone tells me. And it's true. Sarah always worried about what would happen to you if something happened to her. She said you were very closed off, that you needed people around you so you wouldn't isolate yourself." At that moment, Michelle entered the room carrying a tray with coffee and cookies. She greeted Dr. Fernando politely, but Richard noticed a tension in her posture. "Michelle, Dr. Fernando is Sarah's cousin, a doctor in São Paulo." "Pleased to meet you," she said, but her voice sounded cautious. The pleasure is mine. Richard told me that you have become a family. We have, confirmed Michelle, and there was a firmness in her voice that Richard knew well. It was the tone she used when she felt threatened. After Dr. Fernando left, promising to keep in touch and offering any help that was needed, Michelle approached Richard with a worried expression. "There's something strange about that visit," she said. "Why do you think that?" "First, he shows up out of nowhere after months that the case has been resolved. Second, all that exaggerated guilt about Sarah's death. And third what? He asked a lot of questions about our family, about how we met, how long we've lived here, about the children." Richard frowned. Michelle was right. Dr. Fernando had shown excessive curiosity about details of their lives. "You think he might be connected to Judge Freitas?" "I don't know. But something doesn't feel right." That night, Richard called Marina in Wilmington, asking her to discreetly investigate Dr. Fernando Cavalcanti. The answer came the next day, during Lily's birthday party. "Richard, I have news about your visitor," Marina said on the phone. "Dr. Fernando Cavalcanti really is Sarah's cousin, really is a doctor in Sao Paulo, but there's something he didn't tell you." "What?" "He lost his medical license 3 years ago for professional misconduct. He's facing lawsuits for fraud in medical agreements. Does that explain the visit? It explains it if he's looking for a way to redeem himself publicly. Your case had a lot of repercussions. Maybe he wants to associate himself with the story of the heroes who brought down medical corruption." Richard wasn't entirely convinced, but decided not to worry excessively. Lily's party was more important than his suspicions about distant relatives. The party was a success. Children from Lily's school filled the garden with laughter and games. Dorothy had prepared a 3-layer cake, and Michelle organized games and activities that kept everyone entertained. "Godfather," Lily said when it was time to cut the cake, "can I make a special wish?" "Of course, my princess. I want Aunt Sarah to always be watching over our family, and I want us to stay together forever." "Forever," promised Richard, hugging the girl. But as he watched Lily blow out the candles, surrounded by friends and family, Richard had a strange feeling, as if something important was about to happen. Not necessarily something bad, but something that would change the course of their lives again. That feeling intensified when at the end of the party he received a call from Robert Mendez, his lawyer. "Richard, I need to talk to you about an important legal matter." "What matter?" "Doctor, Fernando Cavalcanti has filed a petition in court. He's claiming that as Sarah's only living relative, he has rights to her inheritance." "What do you mean? Sarah left everything to me." "She did, but Fernando is questioning the validity of the will, claiming that Sarah was under the influence of medication when she signed it." The call fell like a bomb in the middle of the celebration. Richard looked around, seeing his family gathered, happy, building precious memories, and felt a familiar fury growing in his chest. "He wants to destroy our family," he murmured. "Who wants to destroy what?" asked Michelle, approaching with Ethan in her arms. Richard explained the situation and saw the fear return to Michelle's eyes. The same fear she had shown months ago when she believed they could lose everything. "We'll fight," she said with determination. "Like we fought against Judge Freitas." "This is different, Michelle. Fernando isn't a criminal. He's a relative who has legitimate legal rights." "Legal rights, maybe, but not moral rights," said Danny, who had joined the conversation. "Sarah chose you as her heir. She knew what she was doing. The problem is proving that," said Richard. It was then that Lily, who had overheard part of the conversation, made an observation that changed everything. "Godfather, did Aunt Sarah leave anything written about our family?" "What do you mean, Lily?" "Like a letter saying that she wanted us to stay together." Richard stopped. There was something he hadn't checked since Sarah's death, a box of letters and personal documents that she kept in the closet of the room. He had never had the courage to open it, preferring to keep her memories untouched. "Maybe," he said, a glimmer of hope being born in his heart. "Maybe she left one more surprise for us." The box of Sarah's letters and personal documents was on top of the closet of the master bedroom, dusty and untouched for more than 5 years. Richard had placed it there shortly after the funeral, promising himself that one day he would have the courage to open it. That day had finally arrived. With trembling hands, he took down the carved wooden box that Sarah had received as a gift from her mother on her wedding day. Michelle, Danny, and even Lily accompanied him, forming a silent circle around the table in the room. "Are you sure you want to do this now?" Michelle asked softly. "I need to," replied Richard, slowly opening the lid. "If Sarah left something that can help us, I need to find it." The box was full of letters, photos, small notes that they used to exchange, birthday cards kept with affection. It was a museum of 15 years of marriage, each paper telling a story of love and partnership. "Look," said Lily, picking up a photo where Sarah appeared smiling in the garden of the house. "She was very pretty." "She was," agreed Richard, feeling his heart clench with the familiarity of that pain he thought he had overcome. It was at the bottom of the box that they found 3 sealed envelopes with different dates written in Sarah's elegant handwriting. The first was from 2 years before her death, the second from 6 months before, and the third was dated just a week before she passed away. "To my beloved Richard, when he is ready to move on," he read aloud what was written on the first envelope. With fingers that trembled visibly, he opened the oldest letter and began to read. "My dear Richard, if you are reading this, it means that I have left this world and you have finally found the courage to open my memory box. I want you to know that I am not afraid to leave, but I am afraid to leave you alone. You have always been a man who loves intensely, and I know that my absence will hurt for a long time. But I also know that you have a heart too big to remain closed forever. When you are ready, and only you will know when that time has come, allow yourself to love again. Allow yourself to form a new family, whatever it may be. You were born to take care of people, to protect, to love. Don't waste this gift because of longing. With all my eternal love, Sarah." The silence that followed was profound and emotional. Michelle wiped away her tears discreetly, and even Lily seemed to understand the solemnity of the moment. "She knew," Richard murmured. "She knew I would find you." The second letter, dated 6 months before Sarah's death, was even more specific. "Richard, if you are reading this letter, it is because something has happened to me, and you are probably facing questions about our decisions. I want you to know that everything we did, every choice we made, was thinking about our future together and your future without me. The house, the assets, everything was left to you, because I trust that you will know how to use our wealth to do good. When I am no longer here, find a family that needs help and open your heart to them. Not as a replacement for what we had, but as a continuation of the love that has always defined us. I know you will make the right choice, because I know your heart better than anyone." Michelle approached Richard and held his hand. "She was preparing you to find us." "It seems so," he said emotionally. But it was the third letter, the most recent, that brought the most important revelation. It was longer than the others, and written with an urgency that shone through in the hurried handwriting. "My beloved Richard, this may be my last letter to you. I have discovered terrible things in the hospital, things that may cost me my life. If something happens to me in the next few weeks, know that it was not accidental. There are very dangerous people involved in a criminal operation, and I made the mistake of trying to stop them alone. But I left hidden evidence. You must have already found the flash drive with Theodore. Use this evidence to bring justice, not only for me, but for all the innocent victims. And especially when it's all over, when justice is done, allow yourself to be happy again. Find a family to love, children to protect, a woman to share your life with. You have so much love to give, my dear. Don't let my departure prevent you from offering that love to those who need it." Any family you choose to protect will have my blessing and my eternal gratitude. With infinite love and the certainty that we will meet again one day, your Sarah." The letter was accompanied by a document that made Richard's eyes widen, an updated will, signed and notarized just 5 days before her death. In it, Sarah clearly specified her intentions. "I leave all my assets to my husband Richard Sterling, with the express condition that he use our inheritance to protect and care for a needy family. This is not just a suggestion, but my firm and unwavering will. Any challenge to this should be considered an attempt to prevent the fulfillment of my last wishes." "My God," Michelle whispered. "She left this as legal protection." "Against whom?" Danny asked. "Against people like Fernando," Richard realized. "She knew someone might try to question her decisions." At that moment, Lily asked a question with the typical innocence of childhood. "Does that mean that Aunt Sarah really wanted us to be a family?" "It means exactly that," replied Richard, hugging the girl. The next morning, Robert received copies of all the letters and the updated will. His reaction was one of professional euphoria. "Richard, this is fantastic. Dr. Fernando doesn't have the slightest chance of challenging this documentation. Not only is the will valid and specific, but the letters clearly demonstrate Sarah's mental capacity and her intentions. And his claim that she was under the influence of medication? Destroyed. The dates of the letters show that she maintained the same intention for years, long before any intensive medical treatment. The hearing with Dr. Fernando took place a week later in the Asheville courthouse. Sarah's cousin arrived accompanied by an expensive lawyer from out of state, clearly confident that he could reverse the situation. "Your Honor," said Fernando's lawyer, "my client is Sarah Sterling's only living blood relative. It is natural that he has rights to her inheritance." "Sarah had no children," argued Robert. "And she left a clear will specifying her intentions. A will made under the influence of medication and of a husband who clearly took advantage of a vulnerable woman." It was then that Robert presented the letters as evidence. The judge read them carefully, and his expression gradually changed from neutral to impressed. "Dr. Fernando," said the judge finally, "have you read these letters?" "I have, Your Honor, but—" "Then you must have realized that your cousin left very specific instructions on how she wanted her assets to be used, and especially that she made a point of specifying that this was her firm and unwavering will. But, Your Honor, I am a blood relative, and Mr. Sterling was her husband for 15 years. More importantly, he has fulfilled exactly the wishes expressed by your cousin. He used the inheritance to protect a needy family." Fernando's lawyer tried a few more arguments, but it was clear that the case was lost. The will and the letters were irrefutable evidence of Sarah's intentions. "Case dismissed," declared the judge. "The inheritance remains with Mr. Richard Sterling as specified in Sarah Sterling's valid will." Dr. Fernando left the courtroom visibly frustrated, but Richard felt only relief. The last threat to his family's stability had been eliminated. That night, as the family celebrated the victory with a special dinner prepared by Dorothy, Michelle pulled Richard aside for a private conversation on the porch. "There's something I need to tell you," she began. "What is it?" "When we started living here, I was afraid it was temporary. That at some point you would change your mind and ask us to leave. And now I know that Sarah brought us to you, and that you are our true home." Richard hugged Michelle, not as a man hugs a woman, but as family hugs family. "You are my home too, all of you." From the garden came the laughter of Lily, teaching Ethan how to count the stars, while Danny organized the toys scattered across the lawn. It was the sound of life continuing, of hope being reborn, of love multiplying in ways that none of them had imagined possible. A year and a half after the last hearing, on a sunny June morning, Asheville awoke to another day. The streets were filled with the aroma of barbecue, funnel cakes, while colorful banners fluttered in the gentle breeze. At the mansion of the Sterling Baker family, as they had come to be known in the city, the preparation for Lily's school picnic was an event that mobilized the whole house. Dorothy coordinated the making of traditional sweets. Michelle finished sewing Lily's summer dress, and Ethan, now 3 years old, ran around the garden wearing a straw hat that was huge on his small head. "Godfather Richard," called Lily, now 9 years old and demonstrating an intelligence that surprised everyone. "Are you going to dance with me at the picnic?" "Of course, my princess," he replied, trying to adjust the tie of the picnic outfit that Michelle had insisted he wear. "But I don't promise I won't step on your foot." "That's okay. Daddy Danny has already taught me how to dodge the stomps." The naturalness with which Lily referred to both Richard and Danny as father figures was one of the most touching aspects of the new family dynamic. For her, there was no confusion or competition. She simply had two dads who loved her in different but equally intense ways. Michelle watched the scene from the kitchen window, smiling with a serenity that she had gained after months of family therapy. The psychologist that Marina had recommended had helped her process not only the traumas of the past, but also the emotional complexity of belonging to a non-conventional family. "What are you thinking about?" asked Danny, approaching her. "I was thinking about how we got here," she replied. "Remember that day when I asked Richard for food in front of the copper spoon? How could I forget? I was in captivity. You were desperate. The children were starving. And today, look at us. Lily is one of the best students in the school. Ethan is a happy and healthy child. You have a thriving business. I'm finishing law school. And Richard has found a reason to smile again," Danny completed. It was true. Richard's transformation had been the most dramatic of all. The closed-off and melancholic man who lived isolated in his mansion had become the emotional center of a noisy and loving family. His hair had gained a few grey strands, but his eyes sparkled with a vivacity that he had not shown in years. The partnership between Richard and Danny at Sterling Textiles had prospered beyond all expectations. Sterling Textiles had become a reference in social responsibility, offering daycare for employees' children, scholarships for underprivileged youth, and a support program for families victims of domestic violence, an initiative that arose from the family's own experience. "Mr. Richard," called Dorothy from the kitchen, "there's a young woman here who wants to talk to you." Richard went to the main entrance, where he found a young woman of about 25 years, dark-haired, with intelligent eyes and a shy smile. "Mr. Sterling, my name is Leticia Santos. I'm a journalist for the Charlotte Observer. How can I help you?" "I'm writing an article about the social impact of the Judge Freitas case. I would like to talk to your family about how your experience inspired change in the region." It was true. In recent months, several families had sought Richard and Michelle, asking for help in denouncing irregularities in hospitals and clinics. Their story had become a symbol of resistance against medical corruption, and inadvertently they had become leaders of a movement for transparency in public health. "Come in," said Richard, "but today is picnic day. If you don't mind the mess." The interview took place in the garden, with Ethan playing around and Lily proudly showing her drawings to the journalist. Michelle spoke about how the experience had changed her perspective on justice and solidarity. Danny told about the importance of not giving up the fight, even when everything seems lost. "And you, Mr. Sterling?" asked Leticia. "What was the main lesson you learned from all this?" Richard looked around, seeing his family gathered, Michelle helping Ethan tie his shoelaces, Lily explaining something to Dorothy, Danny organizing the toys scattered across the lawn. "I learned that family is not only who you are born with," he said, "it's who chooses to stay with you in the most difficult moments, and that love doesn't diminish when it's divided. It multiplies." "And about Sarah? How does she fit into this new family?" "Sarah has not been replaced," replied Richard firmly. "She continues to be part of us, but she was also the one who prepared us to find each other. Sometimes I think she coordinated everything from above." Letitia noted everything carefully, clearly touched by the story. One last question. What advice would you give to other families who are facing difficult situations? It was Lily who answered with the simple wisdom of childhood, that there are always good people in the world. Sometimes it takes a while to find them, but they are always there. When the journalist left, the family prepared to go to the school picnic. In the car, during the trip, Michelle made a revelation that surprised everyone. "I have news for you," she said, smiling mysteriously. "What news?" asked Richard. "Prosecutor Marina offered me an internship at the FBI when I graduate, right here in Asheville." "That's wonderful," exclaimed Danny. "You always wanted to work with justice. And it means we won't have to leave the city," added Lily, clearly relieved. "We were never going to leave," said Richard. "This is our home." The school picnic was a success. Lily shone in the dance presentation. Ethan won over everyone present with his spontaneity, and Richard surprised himself dancing with Michelle under the colourful banners. "You dance well," she said, laughing. "Sarah taught me. She loved these events. She would be proud to see you happy like this. She would be proud of all of us." When they returned home, it was past midnight. The children fell asleep in the car, and Ethan had to be carried in his arms to his room. Lily, pretending to be more awake than she really was, murmured one last question before falling asleep. "Godfather, do you think we will always be a family?" "Always," promised Richard, covering her with the blanket. "Forever." That night, as the silent house sheltered peaceful dreams, Richard made his last visit to Sarah's portrait. But this time, instead of sadness or longing, he felt only gratitude. "Thank you, my love," he whispered, "for preparing me for this family, for leaving the letters, for fighting even when you were alone, and especially for teaching me that true love never ends. It just finds new ways to exist." From the garden came the soft sound of the wind in the leaves of the tree, where a swing that Danny had installed for the children swayed gently in the night breeze. It was the sound of life in motion, of happiness built on the foundations of overcome pain, of hope that had been reborn when everyone thought it was lost forever. 5 years ago, Richard Sterling was a broken man, living alone in a mansion full of empty memories. Michelle Baker was a desperate mother, watching her children go hungry while fleeing persecutions that she did not fully understand. Today, they were a family. Not a perfect family, not a conventional family, but a true family, built on conscious choices, unconditional love, and the determination to protect each other against any storm. And somewhere among the stars that Lily so loved to count, Sarah smiled, knowing that her last and most important mission had been accomplished, to teach the man she loved that the human heart has no limits when it comes to loving, protecting, and building homes where hope can flourish again. The story that began with a little girl asking for food at the door of a restaurant had transformed into proof that sometimes the happiest endings arise from the most improbable beginnings. And that family, in the end, is much more about who we choose to love than about who was born with us. In the yellow house in Asheville, surrounded by gardens where children played and adults dreamed of the future, love had found a way to perpetuate itself through the generations, proving that not even death can interrupt the transforming force of a heart that chooses to love without limits.